There's something I'm really concerned about. It affects all the children of Hamilton County, and in that way, it affects everybody who lives in Hamilton County. Did you know that only 31% of our third graders are ready to learn to read? That's scary, because when you find out about how education works, if you can't read in 4th and 5th and 6th grade and on, you fall through the cracks. And when you fall through the cracks, you fall into poverty, joblessness, and the whole series of social ills that cause society problems, cause personal problems, cause family problems, cause all kinds of problems. So we want to do everything we can to help people get ready for their children to learn to read, their grandchildren to learn to read, and for the county to accept the responsibilities to teach reading in a scientific manner. It's not an art, it's a science.
I'm Thankful Davis with Hamilton Flourishing, and today I'm here with Kendra Reasor. We're going to talk about developing a love of reading. Kendra, thanks so much for coming.
Of course.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you for having me. So I'm Kendra Reasor. I have been teaching third grade for over 9 years. I started my educational career in Charlotte, North Carolina at a high-performing elementary school. And then after 6 years, I then transitioned to the Chattanooga area, and now I teach third grade in Chattanooga.
That's awesome. How long have you been teaching third grade?
So 9 years. My whole teaching career has been in third grade. Yeah, absolutely. And during those 9 years, I really have a strong passion for teaching literacy, reading and writing, and teaching students not just reading, but how to become strong readers, and not just writing, but how to become strong writers.
Yeah, so important. I was thinking about really how third grade you turn this corner, and so you go from learning how to read to applying all those reading skills. And so I really wanted you to focus in on how do you build those skills? And as parents, because I'm a teacher, but I'm also a parent, how do we as parents encourage you and encourage our students in turning this corner? And what are those skills that are necessary to their success?
Absolutely. There's such a big transition from primary grades, lower elementary, and now we're making that transition to third, fourth, and fifth grade as readers. Right. And during that time, we're now teaching reading in a way where we are developing their comprehension. And I know it's that word, comprehension. Everyone hears it, but that's the big forefront of reading in upper elementary school. Yeah. And when we are looking at reading, we want our students to be able to identify genres, and that's a big skill that we need our readers to have.
So when you say genres, can you break that down a little bit? What does that mean exactly?
Absolutely. You have two over large genres. You have fiction, and then you have informational text. And it's important to teach these genre elements and the characteristics of these genres. So when students are walking into a library and they're choosing a book off the shelf, they're understanding, this is a fiction text, it's a story, and understanding those story elements. I'm going to encounter characters. I'm going to encounter characters facing a problem, a solution, and then a life lesson, and ultimately they can learn from those life lessons. So when we're looking at books, we're looking at books as elements of reading, and if they can anticipate those elements, they will develop their comprehension in a deeper way.
Yeah, that's so important to think about every time you're choosing a book. Well, how do I need to look at this book? How do I need to look at it from this perspective? Kind of moving from that and thinking about how parents can really build this love of reading into our everyday lives with our children, into our family and home life. Can you give some tips that you've seen through your career be successful in some ways that as parents we can really support that love of reading in our homes?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I think the number one thing that we can do is modeling what reading looks like. so many times children are told to read at home, but yet they're not seeing parents reading. And the number one thing that we can do is model good reading at home. Parents taking books, looking at newspapers, reading magazine in front of their children is so very important.
I love how you said magazines, because that has been one of our favorite kind of go-to quick sources of reading material.
Absolutely.
So I have a couple magazines that I get, and then my children both have a couple of magazines, and it's such a great resource. It's not very expensive, but they can grab that. They can read it in the car. You don't have to have a ton of time. It doesn't have to be really quiet. I feel like some of those more intense books. So I think that's such a great
absolutely
reminder that there's it doesn't just have to be a book. It could be a newspaper article
Right. And in addition to, modeling reading for parents, it's also important that they're having book talks with them, knowing what your child's reading. And I think in the upper elementary grades, we're like, oh, okay, they're reading a chapter book. Oh, they're proficient readers. We're good.
Right.
But it's important that we are looking at and saying, okay, are you truly understanding the text that you're reading? Let's talk about it. What are your characters facing in your story? What do you think is going to happen next? Having those academic conversations and book talks is really important at home.
So what would be the elements of a book talk if you were going to teach a parent?
Sure.
Okay, this is how you do a book talk. That would be kind of like a dialogue about the text. What would those elements be that they would need to include?
Yeah, you can start with the basics of, okay, so can you tell me, start with the summary. Can you tell me what you just read?
Right.
What's going on in your story? Then once they talk about it, you're going to have more of an insight into the characters or into what they're learning, and then ask questions of like, well, what do you think about that? Do you agree with this problem your character is facing?
I love that.
Giving them a voice and kind of like the driving seat of that reading conversation is important. So letting them say, well, what if you were that character? What would you do and why?
Yeah.
So you can learn a lot about your child too through these book talks.
Yeah, and their perspective on
absolutely.
what they read. And sometimes I'm so fascinated by, we read the same thing, we read it together, and then they got something totally different than what I got. I'm like, wow, that character was, I didn't really like that character. And you're surprised by what they kind of came up with. Okay, so let me ask you something.
Okay.
If, because I've seen this happen a lot,
Right.
when you're saying, okay, what did you read? And then the answer is, well, I don't really know. So as a parent, kind of or a teacher, where do you go from there when the response is, I'm not sure?
Okay, so here's your great go-to. Turn it over to the back of the book. There's always a blurb at the back of the book, and it kind of gives that synopsis to the story. So you already have like the characters' names. It kind of gives you an insight into some of the problems. And then you can always go to, well, what does your character want in the story? Every character has motivations, and so talking about the motivations is really important, and that can help that conversation when I don't know. Or if you really feel like it's not a just right text, because sometimes kids do carry around books as like a badge of honor of I'm reading this really huge book. It's not about the title or genre. It's how long is your book, right? And so when we're looking at that, say, okay, well, is this a just right book for you? And so maybe, well, hey, let's sit down together. Let's read a couple chapters together and then really get your mind going into the book.
So if we're thinking about third grade and moving into fourth and fifth grade, what are some texts that you think would be some good suggestions for parents of third graders, like transitioning from second grade, maybe more picture books, to some third grade, a meatier text? Can you give us any suggestions?
Sure. When picking out books for children, it's important to let them be a part of that process. Understanding what are your child's interests, what are their passions, what are they interested in learning about, and then once you have their interests, then start shopping around for the just right book.
Oh, that's so important.
I think so many times we feel like, okay, this was my favorite book growing up. This has to be my student's favorite book or my child's favorite book, but it's not that way. It needs to be choice-based, and looking at interest first is important for sure.
So one thing that I found with my children is they really gravitated towards some of the books like the 12-Story Treehouse and those books that have some drawings in there. And so then I was like, okay, I kind of get this. You need a little bit more support before we can go to the Percy Jackson series.
Right. I definitely think there needs to be a conversation with your child about what types of books they like to read, but also include your child's educator, include your child's teacher of saying, hey, what are you noticing in the classroom? What are some of your suggestions too? Because ultimately, your child's teacher knows your child as a reader too. And I think it's important to open that avenue and saying, right there as a parent, you're saying, I care about my child's reading life, not just at home, but also in school too. And so how can we bridge that gap? So opening that door for dialogue of finding good books and including the teacher on that is important.
Yeah, because I know as teachers, we love to be a resource.
We're like, oh, let me give you information. Great. Yes.
I have a lot to give you.
Great.
So sort of moving from the reading, another big component in literacy is writing. And third grade, we really start to build some serious writers. So we were talking earlier about the Lucy Calkins quote, teach the writer, not the writing. Can you talk a little bit about what does this mean to teach the writer, and how do we develop true, authentic writing as children age and as they go into middle school?
Absolutely. You know, the goal of writing is to be able to transfer skills. And I think as we transition into 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, we're now looking at writing as a process. And it's no longer just based on a project. And, you know, as cute as it is to write about fall time or write a little poem, we're now looking at how can I teach you skills in various writing genres that then you can transfer on into 4th and 5th grade and middle school. So, for example, if a child is doing a research paper or a research book, informational book on penguins because they love penguins, they're not just learning about penguins. We're now teaching them, okay, as good writers, we develop that table of contents. And that table of contents is, okay, we can now use that in every piece of an informational book that you're writing. So we're teaching them habits of writing within genres that we can transfer.
Wow, that's so important. What are the ways that as parents, because we don't really talk about this very much, but we could support writing in our homes? Are there any tips that you have? Because that's kind of, I feel like that's harder.
Absolutely. And I think when parents there has to be a mind shift, because sometimes when you are reading your child's writing at home, you're thinking grammar, spelling, because that's the great thing that you can hone in on. Oh, this is spelled incorrectly. This is grammar. We need to recorrect this. Right.
Yeah.
What we need to do is look at the art of writing, look at their craft, look at their voice, and saying, oh, wow, I really liked how you opened up your story by giving us sensory details about the setting. You know, start giving your child compliments about their writing and back away from spelling and grammar and really help build their stamina as writers. I mean, it's important that we're changing that shift from writing is about spelling to now we're developing an art of writing.
When you say stamina of writing, what does that look like in a third grader, beginning of the year to third grader into the year?
Absolutely. I think so many times kids, when they walk into that door, that classroom door, and they sit down, they're like, I don't like writing. And it's because they're told that their writing isn't what it needs to be, or it's not good enough, or they need to change it to fit, you know, a systematic approach or something. And what we have to do is really say, okay, everyone is a writer. Everyone in this classroom, we are all authors, we are all writers. And what we're doing is we are going to write long and hard. And let me give you the tips and tricks in order to write a longer story. And I think that it's about creating that safe environment where in the beginning of the year, they're writing, you know, maybe a few sentences and they're like, I'm done.
Yeah.
But now, towards the end of the year, once they think they're done, they're like, oh, I'm going to go back, and because as good writers, we go back and we revise our writing. And knowing that writing isn't done, we're now embarking on revisions and really developing that stamina to stay with a piece a little bit longer.
So would that be a certain amount of time, or would that be the length that they are working on?
It could be length, but then it's also that mindset too, that I have a stamina where once I put that period on the paper and I say I'm done, in the beginning they would say they're done, but now it's, okay, I'm ready to keep on writing. I'm ready to reread what I've written so far, and maybe the next day go back and revise a couple things. So stamina is not just, I'm setting a timer for 30 minutes, right. Yeah. It's that when you give them that writing time in the classroom, that they know what to do with their pencil and they feel confident as a writer.
Thanks. I think that that's a big piece, and it's important to talk about those two in tandem. When you're talking about literacy, you're talking about reading, you're also talking about writing, especially as we move.
They go hand in hand, hand in hand. Yeah.
So let me ask you this. What do you do for that student that comes in and is like, I hate reading?
Yeah. So, it happens every year, right? They're like, I'm not a reader. And it's really disheartening too, and it kind of breaks your heart knowing that they have already changed. They already have a mindset of who they are as readers and who they are as writers. And so what we have to do is encourage readers and writers, and we have to encourage them that everyone is a reader in this classroom, and it's our job as educators to give you the tools to become a strong reader. And I think a lot of times when kids are saying they're not a strong reader, they just haven't found the just right book. They haven't found a book series that's going to tap into and open this new magical world to them. Yeah. So as educators, we're like, oh, okay, it's kind of exciting. We're like, yes, we are going to find you the right series, and we are going to help you grow and develop the skills you need to become those lifelong readers. Yeah.
So that kind of made me think of something just about using the library as a resource. So we have a library in our communities. We have libraries at school. You can even, rent audiobooks.
Yes.
So can you talk about sort of building this literacy-rich environment within not just our classrooms, but within our communities and our homes as parents? How can we start to do that, or what are some tips and tools that you can offer to help us do that and strengthen those literacy environments?
Like you said with the library, I think it's so important that parents take their children to the library, and they are given that choice to choose books, and they're saying, oh, okay, this is a part of our routine, and we're seeing that we check out books in a way in which we love reading. And the more books that children can read, and the more books that children can touch and they have around them, the more that they will grow as readers. And we talk about the library, but we also look at, okay, what about your library at home? Are you bringing books from school to home? Are you do you have stacks of libraries? And if we don't have access to books at home, then that's where we have to use our schools to support that reading at home as well. And reaching out to teachers and saying, hey, my child needs a couple more books to read, and making sure that their backpack is always filled with books is important.
That's great. As a teacher, do you send books home regularly? Do you make sure they've checked them out? Or what does that look like, making sure that backpack is full?
So I'm blessed at my school where the children can check out books from our school library, but then also I give my students reign to take out books from our classroom library and take home. But because I know where my students are as readers, I know what books are in their backpack too. So I can say, hey, how was that? How was your Because of Winn-Dixie book that you started last night? And so I always know where they are as readers. And I think as parents, we need to make sure that we know what books our children have at their fingertips. Because you could have a backpack full of books, but if we're not reading them from cover to cover, then we're not growing.
Yeah. And I know I've had to go back and be like, I think you can get a little bit bigger of a book than this. Like, I think we've done enough Nathan Hale for right now, because those are such great. But we're gonna get a book with no pictures. So
Yeah, and I think it's having that balance. And, you know, we talk about eating healthy, right? And we talk about, okay, as adults, we need to make sure we're eating healthy and we have our meats and we have our vegetables and, you know, whole grains. And I tell my students, we also need to have a literacy diet, a reading diet in which I know you're choosing graphic novels and you love them, but let's now make sure we're trying some informational text, and we need to, you might have one series that you love and that's great, but let's try different genres.
Yeah. I think that's very important to think about, that literacy diet. I like that. I think I'm gonna
healthy literacy diet. Expand your genres. Yeah.
So one thing that we haven't talked about, but we did kind of before this vidcast started, discuss it, is maybe audiobooks or reading aloud.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and that's something that my family did growing up and we do now. And it's a different type of comprehension, though. When you're reading aloud in your classroom, that's a different way of listening, and it's a different way of receiving information. How do you think that plays into being understanding literacy and being a good reader? How does that auditory component play in, and how should parents read aloud, or how can we support that? Because that is a very specific skill.
I think it's important to understand that auditory comprehension is just as important as reading a book and being able to comprehend the story in your mind. And when you're looking at audiobooks or podcasts, the purpose of those audiobooks is you're processing this information in a different way. And so you're using a different part of your brain, and you're really thinking about the story in your mind in a different way. And audiobooks are great and podcasts are great, especially for reluctant readers, because many times they have different character voices and you can see the mental movie a little bit better in your mind that way. But one of the best parts of audiobooks and podcasts is the conversations that deem themselves afterwards. So if you have a family podcast that you're listening to, or a family audiobook in the car, long travels, talking about the story together and making predictions or summarizing or describing these characters together is a powerful tool, and that can be magical.
It really is like a shared experience that you're all having at the same time, and then it's like you're experiencing those same emotions all together. So
and I mean, many times when people are traveling, they'll watch a video in their car and their kids will have their headphones on and they'll all watch a movie, but why not create that mental movie in their mind with a family audiobook or a family podcast? And there's one great podcast. Have you heard of it? It's called Why Not? It's like Why Not, or for curious questions that curious kids ask. And these are all submitted by kids. And
that's really neat.
Why is the sky blue? Why is the grass green? And these weird questions that you're like, oh, I'm not quite sure. But these are great podcasts to...
Like an informational text.
Yes, except, in a fun way.
Yes, good. Ooh, that's some really good information. Well, we really appreciate you coming, Kendra. Is there any summarizing information you would like to share?
Yeah, ultimately, there's not one perfect way to teach reading. If we did, we would have a world full of proficient readers, which we would love that. But what we need to do is build that strong partnership between strong educators and parents, and together we have to create these lifelong readers.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for watching. I'm Thankful Davis with Hamilton Flourishing.
If you like this video, please subscribe. Be sure to click the bell so you'll receive notification when we release a new video. Be sure to go to our website, www.hamiltonflourishing.org, for more information.